me set aside, God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about you, about me, about my fellow man, about the 12 steps, and please allow me to gain a fresh new vision, perspective, and understanding of what you, what me, what my fellow man, and the 12 steps are all about. Amen. This book study is not affiliated with AA, CA, DAA, or any other 12-step organization, nor are we bound to any fellowship by association. Our groups are bound together in the love we all share for the big book and the program of recovery contained in it. We are simply a virtual fellowship where all are welcome, regardless of their addiction or imperfections. This big book study, in addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Toya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Noreen. Hi, everyone. My name's Toya. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Great to have you all here for this Big Book Compendium, Big Book study. This week we are continuing on Chapter 3, more about alcoholism, which is all about the insanity that precedes the first drink and all about Step 1, powerlessness. And as was pointed out to me last week, this chapter could have been renamed More About Insanity, because that is the mental state that precedes the first drink. And so just to quickly recap last week, and welcome if anyone here is new to AA especially. And so there are 4 examples in this chapter of various types of insanity that precede the first drink. So first it was the man of 30 who'd been doing a lot of spree drinking, and he could see that he wasn't going to get anywhere in life if he continued drinking. So he stayed bone dry for 25 years just on his own willpower. And then when he retired, satisfied that he'd achieved what he wanted to achieve in life and in business, out came the carpet slippers and a bottle. Sadly, he was dead within 4 years, and proving that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And if I have that allergy, that abnormal reaction to alcohol, then time doesn't fix it. Time doesn't cure it. It doesn't just go away with the passage of time. And then the second example was our friend called Jim. And he failed to enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. So he made a beginning on the steps, and we thought maybe he did step 3 and 4. Maybe he went through the steps but didn't sponsor anyone. I'm not too sure exactly where he got to, but things came back to him very quickly, his family and material things and so on. That all came back very quickly, and he fell victim to the delusion that he could drink. And then the third one, of course, was that ridiculous example of the jaywalker, which just seems absurd and ridiculous. But if we substitute the jaywalker's behavior for our drinking, we can see it's exactly the same. And anyone with some sanity would be go through the ringer with their drinking, have some negative consequences. A person in their right mind, or a person with the ability to have sane, sound reasoning and logical thought would simply say, well, I'm not doing that again. I'm not drinking again. But not so for the alcoholic, unfortunately, who tries various different ways and methods. This time it'll be different. I'll show you how, and on and on and on. That can go on for decades. And then number 4 was Fred. And this Fred's story is based on the actual story of a fellow by the name of Harry Brick, whose story, A Different Slant, appeared in the first edition of the big book. And so we're picking up today at page 42. 42, where are we? Hang on, 2 of the members. So the first full paragraph. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. So they were on step 12. They had searched out another alcoholic. If I just jump ahead quickly, I don't know if Rach ever jumps ahead or not, but every now and then I do. If we look at page 96, search out, it tells us, do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. So we're instructed to actively look for someone to work with in order to maintain our own sobriety, but also to fulfill that responsibility statement. When anyone anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA to be there, and for that I am responsible. And so these 2 members came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic. So that was the first thing they did. Do you think you're an alcoholic? 2, and if I were really licked this time, I had to concede both propositions. So, do you think you're an alcoholic? Do you think you're really beaten this time? Yes or no. They're yes or no questions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. So there's a paradox. The real paradox of step 1 is that if you believe you're hopeless, then there's hope. That's a good thing, because this program really only seems to work for someone who's desperate, hopeless, is willing then to go to any length. Because even though it's a simple way of life, a simple program, it does call on us to have a lot of integrity, courage, honesty, perseverance, discipline, consistency. All of these things are really requirements for people to stay sober permanently in the long run. So the more hopeless, the better, actually. Who would have thought? Because if a person has still got some ideas, some ideas that have yet to be tried and tested out, then a person probably needs to find those things. Quite often, Alcoholics Anonymous is the last thing a person will try, but the first thing that works. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. So the person here in the story still had a little bit of an idea, maybe I can do this, maybe I'm not that bad. But once these 2 members carried the message, giving them lots of examples of people who'd thought they could beat this thing and what happened to them. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action. So they talked there about steps 1 and 2, and then the program of action, steps 3 to 12, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow, but the program of action, the steps, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. So there'd have to be change. A lot of my thinking, they say AA stands for altered attitudes. A lot of my thinking would have to change. Things like, I can do it on my own. I don't need help. I know what I'm doing. These kind of ideas and phrases and vocabulary has to be turned around to, I don't know, I can't do it on my own. I need help, and so on. And to become honest, open-minded, and willing. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. So there's a promise, and I highlight promises in pink. I actually highlight a lot of things when I go through the big book, and I circle the musts and so on. I may not do that as thoroughly here. I'm not sure, as I've said before last week, I don't come to this big book study often, so I'm not sure exactly how you guys do it here. But I realise I already missed a must. If we go back to the fourth line down where I started, two of the members, I had to concede. So I circle had to, that's just a 2-word phrase that says must. I must concede both propositions. I am an alcoholic and I'm really beaten. I am powerless over alcohol. So that's step 1. And I also double underlined, so I'm just going back to the very bottom of the page, the spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I've double underlined that. That's a really strong statement. Sometimes in the big book there are sort of shades of grey. It says maybe or perhaps. Other times it uses language which is black and white. Never, all, always. And here, this is a statement, an absolute statement. Spiritual principles would solve all my problems. And a lot of it really comes down to the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So sometimes the answer is just to accept things I can't change. And I do cross-references sometimes as well. I've done a cross-reference to page 13 here, and I'm just going quickly back to page 13. And there it is on the 3rd line up from the bottom of page 13. I would have the elements of a way of living, and I've put a square box around that phrase, a way of living, because that comes through again and again in the book as well. It talks about a way of living. This isn't a program of abstinence from alcohol, even though that's the starting point, definitely. But it is a way of life, a way of living which answered all my problems. So twice we're told in the book, this way of life, these spiritual principles contain the answers to all my problems. So along there, I just put a little 42 next to that one. So I'm told twice, this spiritual way of life contains the answers to all my problems. And for me, I find that very comforting because life does come with problems, difficulties, challenges, whatever you want to call them. Life is life. When I first got sober in 1994, I had the childish sort of fairy tale idea that, oh, great, I don't have to. And I saw all these wonderful, sober, happy people in AA that weren't drinking, didn't have to drink. And relapse is not inevitable. Relapse is not a requirement. I understand, of course, it does happen. And I learn a lot from that, from people who come back and tell me what happened. But life is life. So now I'm just having a quick look. So on page 120, just jumping ahead, still looking at this idea that spiritual principles would solve all my problems, at the bottom of page 120, place the problem. So this last and second last line, place the problem along with everything else in God's hands. So everything, that's another absolute word, everything. Place the problem, so the alcohol problem, along with everything else in God's hands. And just before the meeting, I was talking about my home group where I shared my story. I had my sobriety anniversary recently, And it just came to mind that a young guy there shared he's sober 7 months now, and quite a couple of times in his share he said he really had this strong feeling that the problem had been removed. It's just gone, and he still felt quite incredulous that he just doesn't have a desire to drink at all. He seemed quite surprised that this has happened and it's gone and it's been taken from him. And that is one of the promises in this program, in the big book as well. The problem has been solved. It no longer exists for us. These words are in the book. So let's continue back on page 42. I have since been brought into a way of living. There it is again. So I just put a square around those words, a way of living. So it's not just meetings attendance. It's not an intellectual exercise through the big book or through the steps, but a way of life. Infinitely more satisfying, and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. So that's a beautiful, beautiful promise to me, that I can have a way of life that is infinitely, isn't that a wonderful word? Infinitely more satisfying, without end, satisfaction without end, contentment, peace, serenity, and useful, of course. And the idea that I had this false idea as well when I got sober, a very selfish idea. How wonderful. Now I'm sober, I get to do all the things I wanted to do. And I became very self-focused and very self-centered. And it actually took me many, many years to really understand that that is not the point of this. Those things do come, and I've had abundance rain on me and continues to do so. But the actual purpose of this, sorry to jump around, but the actual purpose of this is on page 77, the third line down. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. So it's not, our real purpose is to get sober and then do all the things we've always wanted to and enjoy ourselves as much as we can. That comes. The happiness and the enjoyment comes as a byproduct of, for me, living life the right way, seeking God's will, seeking to be of service, seeking to be useful. And that goes against every fibre of my being. Because of my selfishness and self-centeredness. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I personally agree with that statement, because even though I wasn't drinking all day, every day, I was a binge drinker. Those days I wasn't drinking, I had the malady, very easily prone to depression, self-pity, anxiety, negativity, being at odds with people around me constantly. I was always on a collision course with something or someone. So even the best moments were still tinged with difficulties and the knowledge that they wouldn't last long. You know, I would not go back to it even if I could. Absolutely. I put a tick next to there, definitely. I don't want it. And so the proviso there is that I must stay awake. If I stay awake, I can continue to have these promises and live this way of life. But if I go back to sleep and go back into delusion and illusions, become prey to false pride and ego, the risk is I could go back. And of course, it does happen. I've put at the top of that, on the first one or two lines, I've put a cross-reference to page 11. So if we go back to page 11, there's a beautiful phrase here. It's actually 13 lines up from the top of the bottom of page 11. It said, he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. And I put a 43 next to that. A level of life better than the best he had ever known. The same sentiment there. A way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. I wouldn't exchange its best moments for the worst I could have now. So that same idea there on page 43 and page 11 repeated, because this is a textbook, so it gives us some information and then it repeats it sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times, important points that it wants to bring home. That's the difference between a novel and a textbook. Let's continue on page 43. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer. I don't know if there's any really young people here or not, or even older people who know what a ringer is. The olden style washing machine used to have an apparatus at the top of it. It was like 2 round cylinders, rubber cylinders, very tight, close together. And you'd wind the handle and push your clothes through it and it would squeeze the water out of them. But the clothes would come out kind of wrinkled up, mangled looking, or could do. I guess there was probably more of a, I think my mum had one of those way back. I can only barely remember it. Of course, you never ever put your fingers anywhere near that, otherwise they were going to get mangled. So most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. And I haven't done a cross-reference to that, but it's on the previous page. Hopeless condition. Hopeless condition, that kind of thing was mentioned a couple of times. Of course, this, as I said at the beginning, this chapter is all about step 1. And I must say that the first 2 pages of chapter 3 are among my very, very favourites out of all of the book. Page 30 and 31. I can still remember the experience I had the first time I read these 2 pages. I really thought, that's me, that's me, that's me. I can't believe it. They've written exactly what it's like to be me. It really, really hit home right to my core. And so many people, young newcomers who I meet in the program, I might even just say to them, read page 30 and 31. A lot of people say, start at Bill's story, of course, or start at Doctor's Opinion. When I came in, I couldn't relate to Bill's story at all, not one bit. I just didn't, it almost made me think maybe I'm not an alcoholic. But then it was described to me that they're the yets, because I hadn't been to a detox or an asylum or a hospital, not for my alcoholism anyway. So it was basically explained to me that that's the progression of the illness, that's the yets for you. But I've also heard many people say that they really identify with Bill's story, but certainly Doctor's Opinion and more about alcoholism, as I said, but there's instruction there at the beginning of this chapter. And I'm just going back and forwards a little bit in this chapter because we're about to go into chapter 4, We Agnostics, which is all about step 2. So I'm just doing a little bit of a review, recap of this chapter before we move on. So step 1. Let's continue on page 43. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusion. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital. Now I've got Dr. Percy Pollock of Bellevue Hospital. He was a psychiatrist in New York. it's years since I've wrote these notes. I can't even expand any more on that. Maybe during this sharing session, if anyone has got information about that they want to talk about, I'm interested to hear that. And so that doctor made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless. And 100% hopeless, I think of that as the problem because it's alcoholism, but it's also the solution. Because I need to be 100% hopeless if I want to proceed. There can't be 1%, which is reservation, 1% of me hanging on to some old ideas about how I'm going to do this. And I hear people say that the only step one is the only step that we can do 100%. And I remember a fellow in the meetings I used to go to in early sobriety used to say, it's like being pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't be a little bit pregnant. And so I had to ask myself, am I alcoholic or not? Because in the early days, I'd sort of fluctuate a little bit. Some days I'd think, yes, 100%, I'm definitely alcoholic. And the next day I'd think, well, what if I am too young? What if I'm not? I haven't gone to the depths these people have. Maybe, what if, maybe. But ultimately, I never did go back and pick up that first drink because sanity had returned. By the grace of God, sanity had returned, and I was able to think about it logically and realize, look, it doesn't really even matter. Even if I'm not an alcoholic, my life's better without alcohol. This was the evidence I'd gathered for myself. So I thought I'll just keep going to meetings, and over the last 31 years, I've never left AA. I've never stopped coming to meetings. And yes, I do admit that I am an alcoholic today. But even then, if someone did a blood test on me or something and said, no, actually, we found out that you're not an alcoholic, I still wouldn't want to drink. Just like it says at the top of this page, I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. And even recently, I've had some trauma and grief, a couple of episodes of grief through loss of family members and so on. But in a strange way, I want to be present for it all. I'm human. I embrace the human experience today in a way that I didn't as a practicing alcoholic, constantly seeking to anesthetize or escape or run away from myself, from reality, from difficulties, from pain. So I have grown up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and you'd hope so too, that someone in their mid-50s has finally grown up. Anyway, I'll keep going. So 100% hopeless. So the doctor said there's no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. So the solution, divine help, and beyond human aid. So there's step one, 100% hopeless, and two, beyond human aid. If I'm powerless, then I need a power. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I had been able to avoid it. Wow, that's strong words from a doctor, isn't it? I imagine that a psychiatrist or a doctor not turning people away because that's their profession, to help people, to try to help heal people. I actually have a friend who's a clinical psychologist, and she said she does not treat any people with substance use disorders. No way. She does not take any of them ever on her caseload. One, they're too unreliable. I think they cost too much money. They just don't show up. They're unreliable. I think that's the main reason. It's many years ago since I had a conversation with her, But that was one of the things. And perhaps she also knew that many of them just didn't make progress in therapy. And I've heard many people in AA as well say that they just don't tell people the truth. And it's here in the big book as well. They just don't tell people the truth at all. And another friend of mine who was a nurse in medical emergency department, he said, whatever amount of alcohol a patient told him they were drinking, he would add 40% to that. Just seeing so many people that just do not accurately report how much alcohol they've actually been taking. And quite often alcoholics will say, oh yeah, I only ever have a couple. They only ever have a couple of drinks, 2 drinks. Anyway, continuing on, Dr. Pollock says, people like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. And so I have profound, deep respect for the spiritual approach. And again, this way of living, and I use orange highlighter to talk about the solution in the big book. I highlighted that in orange. It's talking about the solution and even says there is virtually no other solution. And Carl Jung was the first one really that I know of through AA who gave us that idea when he said to Roland Hazard, you know, I've never really had any luck with working with people like you. The only time, you know, these rare exceptions are people who've had spiritual experiences. And Carl Jung said that he thought the alcoholic's thirst was really a thirst for wholeness or for union with God. And I really, really loved that when I heard that because I could identify with that. I'd been searching for a higher purpose or meaning, something with depth, something with real meaning, not just this material stuff, not just this money and material things and stuff and keeping up with the Joneses. This stuff just didn't make sense to me and it held not much appeal at all. It just didn't make sense. But the God, this spiritual way of life and the God idea, that made sense to me. But I couldn't find it in church either. I tried that. That didn't make sense. The idea that one religion says to the rest of the world, we've got the answer, we're right, everyone else is wrong. And then the next religion over on another continent says, no, we're right, you're wrong, we've got the answer. Again, that just didn't make sense to me. So when I came to AA and was told that I could have a God of my own understanding, this was just incredible. I'd obviously never heard of such a thing before. And so here we come to the end of this chapter 3, more about alcoholism or more about insanity. I really like that. Even after 31 years, I'm still hearing new stuff in AA all the time, things I haven't heard before, and that really gives me a buzz. So once more, so they've driven this point home at the beginning of the chapter. It talks about this delusion that we are like other people. All drinkers, all abnormal drinkers have it, this delusion that we want to prove. Many, many times over and over again, we try to prove that we are not alcoholic. We can drink like other people, which we can't, but we still try to prove it. And that is insanity. That's just insane. Insanity, illusion, and those words at the beginning of this chapter, all talking about it, but in using different words: obsession, illusion, insanity, delusion. That's setting us up at the beginning of the chapter. This is what it's about. And then we've got those 4 examples, 4 clear examples to help us understand insanity. And when I came in and first looked at the steps, I saw step 2 and I thought insanity meant all the crazy things I did when I was drinking. Of course, these are insane things. And I found out later that they're just the results of intoxication. And sometimes even non-alcoholics can do silly things when their inhibitions are lowered and they get carried away with the atmosphere somewhere if things are getting a little bit crazy. But insanity, as we understand it in step 2, is the fact that I would ever pick up a drink again after what happened last time. Not just what happened last time, but what happened the previous dozens or hundreds of times. There was never any ability. I just didn't have the ability to reflect with sane, sound, rational, logical thinking to look at my drinking and realize I need to stop. I need to not do this again. For 12 years, I did not have that ability at all. And so then here we are at the end of this chapter. Once more, we're just going to bring this point home. The alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. So no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. So I could do a cross-reference. I don't have it in there in my book presently, but of course on page 59 we are told it's one of the 60, sorry. It's one of the second pertinent idea B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And I've also put a cross-reference to page 24. Let's have a quick look at that. And so it's in italics, that first full paragraph, it's all in italics. And this is in There Is a Solution. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. And I put in the right-hand column just 43 next to that, because that is the same idea that we're told here. At certain times, that was the thing, I couldn't, after a bad episode, a bad binge, a bad bender, things would go horribly wrong. I'd go off it. I'd think, oh, I'm not drinking. I don't think I ever swore off, because I thought, well, you can't not drink. Of course I'm going to drink. But I would say, I'm just going to not drink for a little while. I'm going to go off it. I'd go on the wagon, and not knowing that I just didn't have the, like it said in there on page 24, I can't bring to mind with sufficient force the memory or the suffering of even a couple of weeks ago. That's not going to be enough for me to not pick up another drink, not to get drunk again. And that's why I think people maybe in rehab, they're told to do consequential thinking. I don't think that works for an alcoholic. I certainly wasn't able to do that at all. I just didn't have that capacity. So no human power. And this is very, very key, the last sentence. His defense must come from a higher power. So there's a must. It's an all or nothing idea, an all or nothing proposition, and which is, it's in here in the book. I can't think exactly where now off the top of my head. God is everything. He either is or he isn't. God is everything or he is nothing. His defense must come from a higher power. That's the only place I'm going to have a defense. And the way I have that defense is, of course, through the steps, and specifically through the relapse prevention steps 10, 11, and 12. And step 11 tells us clearly, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. So if I'm having conscious contact with God, or at least seeking that, then it's not going to be possible for me to drink. I'm just not going to drink. I can't have sane, sound, rational, logical thinking and connection with a higher power and drink alcohol. I just don't believe it's possible. So let's go on to chapter 4, we agnostics. All about step 2. And the word agnostic comes from the Greek, without, so without, gnostics, knowledge, without knowledge. And just for me personally, for many years, I didn't even bother really reading We Agnostics because I had a belief and a faith and a trust in a higher power. So I thought, why do I need to read We Agnostics? But I believe I need to know what's in the book. I need to understand, because not everyone has that belief or faith or trust in a higher power. So if I'm going to be helping, sponsoring people, I need to know what's in this book. I need to understand what it's about. And for many years, I was also very confused. What's an agnostic? What's an atheist? What's the difference between them? And to be honest, I just wasn't really interested, because I've got a higher power. That's all I need to know. So it's been really good for me to get into this chapter and to find out what's in here, and to find step 2 in this chapter. And step 2 is just a simple question. There's no work to be done on step 1. I don't believe I worked on step 1 for 12 years. So when I came here, I just needed to know, what is an alcoholic? It's a threefold illness. And am I an alcoholic or aren't I? Yes or no. Can I control my drinking? Yes or no. That's step 1 for me. Very, very simple. And, you know, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Then it has a hyphen, which means the next bit relates directly to that our lives had become unmanageable. When I drink, my life becomes unmanageable. That's past tense. Now that I'm sober, restored to sanity, recovered, my life is manageable. Sure, not perfect, not a robot. That's because I'm human. Things that I do is about my humanity. Not necessarily everything I do is alcoholic behavior. And of course, step 2, I'm just going to jump ahead quickly before we get stuck in. So step 2 is basically there on page 47. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? That's it. That's step 2. Yes or no question. Do I believe, or am I willing to believe? That's it. Step 1, step 2, done. On to step 3. But I'm jumping ahead. Let's get stuck in. Page 44. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. Brilliant. We've learned what the problem is. So it's taken us, and the interesting thing I find is the steps are contained in the first 103 pages of the big book, plus the doctor's opinion. Almost half of that is taken up with step 1. That tells me how important it is that I know and understand and accept what the problem is, and that I have the problem. So that's really, really important. So that's what it says here. And again, the textbook, before it goes into new material, it's just quickly recapped where we've come from. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism, which means we're going to learn more about it. We're going to continue learning more about it as we go on. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And so here's another little, what's the word? Criteria, if you like, or another way to help me diagnose, am I an alcoholic or aren't I? If I've come this far and I'm still having doubts, here's a little 2 questions that it asks me. So 1, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, so that's obsession, or, so I don't even have to answer both of these, just one of them will be sufficient to diagnose my alcoholism. Or if when drinking, so after I've already taken the first drink, you have little control, that's the allergy, over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. So interesting that it uses that flexible grey area language. It doesn't say, yes, you're definitely an alcoholic. It says you're probably alcoholic. So, you know, you can tell an alcoholic, but you can't tell them much. And again, I don't know if it's my alcoholism or my personality. I can be a bit contrary, don't like to be told what to do. I like to know everything, all this kind of stuff. So if someone tells me you're an alcoholic, I'm probably going to say, no, I'm not, and here's why. But if they say you can diagnose yourself, then I'm free to get to the truth about myself without any pressure. If that be the case, so there's two questions there. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, so you might be able to stop for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes even a year, but you always go back to it. Or if when drinking, once you start, you can't stop, you have little control. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness. Again, it's being very cautious. The book's being very cautious here. You may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So this is the view of Alcoholics Anonymous, that no other method's going to do this. If you're able to get sober by some other means, potentially it means you might not be an alcoholic. But if you're a real alcoholic, we believe only a spiritual experience will conquer it. And that is the AA program, or way of life, if you like. And that's the basic premise of Alcoholics Anonymous. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster. So there's a warning. If someone says, hey, look, I don't like this God stuff, I don't want to, I'm not sure about this, but we're going to have to say to that person, look, if you continue the way you're going, we believe this is a progressive illness. If you have this illness, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better over time, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis, step 2, were not always easy alternatives to face. And I like things that are simple, like things that are in black and white. And so that gives me 2 choices. I either continue drinking and I'm doomed to an alcoholic death, or I live on a spiritual basis. That's my 2 choices. And I've put a cross-reference to page 25 there, because on page 25, I'm also given 2 choices. And that is the 3rd line up from the bottom of page 25. In there is a solution, or even up one more line. If we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid. So there's, again, a couple of cross-references I've picked up that I've missed, page 60, and the other one that we talked about. We had but 2 alternatives. Again, I like it. Simple, basic, 2 choices. 1, go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation as best as I can. That wasn't going to be an option for me, because I'd already been doing that for a few years and it just could not go on. I had reached the jumping off point, the bitter end. And the other, to accept spiritual help. So there it is. There's my 2 choices. Which one's it going to be? Take your pick. And so continuing on page 44, but it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. Again, that takes me back to what it told us about the alcoholic on page 30. I put a little cross-reference to page 30 there, because we tried to prove again and again that we're different, that we're not alcoholic, because nobody likes to be bodily and mentally different from his fellows. So in hoping against hope, we were not true alcoholics. We did all those things. We tried to prove that we were non-alcoholic. But after a while, we had to, that's a must. We had to face the fact that we must, circle the must, find a spiritual basis of life. So I'd put a box around spiritual basis of life, spiritual way of life, not alcohol abstinence, stay away from one drink one day at a time, careful you don't slip on a banana peel, that kind of thing. This program, this way of life, the higher power of your understanding is much, much more powerful than all of that. And the problem, like I said, the promise of AA is that that problem will be solved, it will be removed, it will no longer exist for us. And then there's a warning, or else. And above that I wrote die. So again, look, that's actually the third example of where we get two choices. We had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual way of life or die. So 3 times we're given 2 choices. Simple. How much more simple can it get than that? But that kind of simple, blunt answers probably isn't going to land well for anyone unless they're absolutely hopeless and have that gift of desperation and honesty, open-mindedness and willingness that only really a desperate person is going to have. A person whose ego has been smashed, even temporarily, enough for some light to come in. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you, but cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. So if there's anyone in this room thinks you're an agnostic or an atheist, there you go. 50% of us were like that. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. Don't be worried, don't be stressed. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome our alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. Now, I've put a reference to the 12 and 12, page 29 there. I'm not going to pull out the 12 and 12 at this point, but if you wanted to look up that reference, you could. And we're at the top of page 45 now. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshalled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly, completely, in other words. So there it is again for the 3rd or 4th time now. No human power could have relieved our alcoholism. We are beyond human aid. Apart from divine help, only divine help would suffice. Although we're not quite at the hour, I think we're close enough. I might leave it there because I think that's a really great spot to pick up next week. Lack of power, that was our dilemma, not alcohol. Alcohol's not the problem, but our lack of power. So that will be a great spot to start next week on page 45. So thank you everyone for being here and for listening. I will end the recording, and then I'm really looking forward to hearing everything that you have to share, or if you have questions and so on.